I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Melanie Carlos, Board Vice President of xMinds, the organization hosting tonight's event. First, I want to turn to Liz Burgos to give the Spanish speakers in our audience instructions for finding the Spanish audio channel. Liz?
Si habla español y le gustaría escuchar esta parte del evento en español, haga clic en el icono Interpretación en su barra de herramientas y seleccione Español.
Thank you, Liz. So tonight we are doing things a little differently. We have two simultaneous meetings this evening, one for preschool, which is session 1, and one for secondary placements, which is middle and high school, or session 2. Just to be clear, you are in the preschool session. So if you're not supposed to be in the preschool session, you can move over to the secondary session. We can put a link to that in the chat. Now that we know everyone's in the right place, let me begin by saying we only have 2 hours. Seems like a lot of time, but it's not really to cover all this information. So I will keep my introduction brief. Our goal is to bring you a thorough and clear review of all the services and programs that MCPS offers to preschool students on the autism spectrum. Our speakers are all MCPS staff, program directors, supervisors, and program specialists who know these programs intimately. We are very grateful to them for taking the time to prepare their presentations and for being here tonight to share what they know. Just as there is a wide range in the support needs of students who are autistic, there is a correspondingly wide range of programs that MCPS offers to support these kids. The first presentation will cover all the different preschool education programs, also known as PEP. So number 1 will be PEP Itinerant, number 2, PEP Inclusive Pre-K, number 3, PEP Collaboration, 4, PEP Classic, 5, PEP Intensive Needs Class, also known as PEP Inc., and last is PEP Full Day. The final presentation of preschool programs will cover the Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program, also known as CAPP. There's a lot of acronyms, I know. Tonight's presentation will cover the programs in this order, from those providing the least support to those providing the most. Although please keep in mind that in practice, there is overlap among the programs. We have tried to minimize the jargon because we really want everything to be understandable. And if you hear something you don't understand, please ask for clarification in the chat. You don't have to wait until the Q&A. Definitely ask in the chat. I know we have a lot of parents here who are new to special education and may not understand the specialized terms. So just ask and we'll clarify. Helping us tonight in the chat are MCPS and xMinds staff standing by and ready to help. In fact, I'd like to mention that we have several important MCPS administrators who will be dropping in and out of our sessions. I'd like to welcome Diana Wiles, Acting Associate Superintendent of the Office of Special Education, Phil Lynch, Director of the Department of Special Education Services, Amy Kropp, Director of the Division of Pre-K Special Programs and Related Services. And finally, Chris Secan, Supervisor of Autism Spectrum Disorders Services. Thank you all for being with us tonight. You, the attendants here tonight, will have lots of opportunities for questions. We'll have a break in the middle and one at the end. But please write your questions for the presenters in the chat at any time, and I will read them out to the presenters when we get to the Q&A break. A word about questions. I do want to give you some guidance. The presenters tonight know all about the programs they run, but they don't know your child. So the questions they can answer are questions about their programs, but they will not be able to answer questions about where your child will fit best. And keep in mind, while our presenters know a lot about these programs, each location or school may be different to some extent. And students' IEPs and schedules are indeed individualized, as they should be, so their experiences may vary. The good news is that tonight you are where you should be to learn about the various placement options. MCPS and xMinds have partnered to provide you with all the essential information about these programs so that armed with that information, you'll be better equipped to assess where your child might be best served. We have asked the speakers to give us lots of useful information about each program and to highlight key differences between them. We've asked them to provide you tonight with a level of detail that isn't available on the MCPS website. We are doing this because we believe parents need this information. So for each program, we ask presenters to answer the following questions. What is the general profile of students who thrive there? What parts of the day are students in self-contained classes versus supported or co-taught classes in the general education setting? Where do the students spend lunch and recess? For programs where not all the students are autistic, to what extent are best practices for students with autism used? How does the program support development of social skills and executive functioning skills? What is the ratio between staff and students in self-contained settings in practice, given the current staff shortages? Ultimately, where your child is placed will be a decision made by your IEP team. But remember that you, parents, are important members of this team. The more you know about your child's placement options, the better advocate you can be for your child when it comes to placement decisions. Finally, before we start the presentation, I want to quickly mention we are recording in both English and Spanish. We'll make the recordings and presentation slides available to you in a few days. So, long last, our speakers tonight are Mary Rose Katina, coordinator of the preschool education program, and Lisa Grant, instructional specialist of autism services, who will talk about CAPP. Mary Rose and Lisa, thank you so much for being with us tonight. And now I'll turn it over to Mary Rose to talk about CAPP.
Thank you, Melanie. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be here. It's nice that there's so many participants here that are interested in learning about our services. So I'm going to let the slides get up here. Okay, Lisa, I think you can go to the next slide. This is our agenda for this evening. I have about till 7:45, so I guess I have about 35 minutes, I think, to speak about the preschool education program, and as we said, fondly known as PEP. And then I'm, happy to try and answer some questions. And then Lisa is going to speak about the Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program, CAPP, and she'll follow up with answering your questions. And then if there's any questions at that point that I haven't answered and we have any time left, I'll be happy to try to answer those as well. Okay, Lisa. This is our introduction. Okay, so just some general information about the preschool education program, or PEP. We are the largest preschool special education program in Montgomery County. We are currently serving over 1,700 students with a wide range of delays and disabilities. And that number is growing every day because I think, as most of you know, as children turn 3, they become eligible for services, or sometimes we have children who are already 3 or 4 and are found eligible for some services, and they come into our program right then. It's not based on coming into school at the beginning of the year like it is for kindergarten and elementary school. We do provide a continuum of services to meet the needs of a variety of students. And our goal really is to prepare all children for kindergarten and for school. Our services range from a variety of regular early childhood settings to what are self-contained special education settings. As the law says, we are always required to consider every student for a regular early childhood setting before the IEP team would consider a self-contained special education setting. And that is the right thing to do, not just because it's the law, but because it's the right thing for kids. We should always be looking at if children can be served with their non-disabled peers, no matter what their delays or disability. But we do have a continuum of services for those children who would need something that is self-contained and not something that is with their typical peers. We serve, as I've been saying, we serve students with a variety of disabilities and delays in all of our classes and in all of our services. And all of our PEP classes and even our itinerant model follow the general education pre-K curriculum and the Maryland Early Childhood Standards. Okay, so I'm going to start with our PEP itinerant services. These services are typically provided in community preschools or childcare settings, sometimes within MCPS pre-K or Head Start classrooms. So if there's a student who's identified for services and they happen to be in a private childcare or at a private preschool that their family has chosen and they've been attending there, we are always first going to look at that setting for them to receive their services, because that's their regular early childhood setting. And we're going to look and see, what's that child's goals? Can we send a PEP special education teacher to that location once or twice a week, where they can address the goals directly with the student while also speaking with the team of people that work with that child at that center or at that school, and help support them in working with the student. And that would be, are the first thing we would always look at. We also would send related, if the student qualifies for related services, we would send the related service providers also to the community preschool or childcare, or to the MCPS pre-K or Head Start classroom if that's where the child is. Okay, Lisa, I think we can move on. So I'm going to talk about what we call PEP inclusive pre-K. And this is full inclusion in a general education pre-K or Head Start classroom for students with IEPs who are in their pre-kindergarten year, meaning they're getting ready to go to kindergarten the following school year. So they would be fully included either all day or half day, depending on the location, with their general education peers. And we have a special education teacher that is assigned to that location that co-teaches with the general education teacher. So what that means is that they plan together, they instruct together in different types of models, and they assess the students together. So basically the children in the classroom belong to both of them. It's not, they belong to the special educator or they belong to the general education teacher. The students are all their students. And they do small groups and large groups, and the whole day they spend together with the support of the special education teacher, who is in there she's in there to support the students based on their needs. So the special education teacher is not there all day. She may be there half a day, depending on the location. She may be in various classrooms. And then there is also a special education paraeducator who is assigned to that location, who is in that classroom when the special education teacher is not there, so that there's always someone from special education that, along with the general education staff, is providing the specialized instruction for the students. One other thing, at least just go back 1 second. Thank you. One other thing I want to say about that is that the class size is typically 20 students, because that is the general education class size, and our students are being served in that classroom with their typically developing peers. Okay, I think we can move on, Lisa. Thank you. PEP collaboration is also a regular early childhood setting, and the way this works is that there's a PEP class and a pre-K or Head Start class that fully collaborate with each other to serve both the students that are typically developing and the students with IEPs. There is a special education teacher and paraeducator who have 9, 10, approximately, that's the average students assigned to them in their classroom, and a general education teacher and paraeducator who have 20 students assigned to them. And what they do is they split the children up into heterogeneous groups so that the group size becomes approximately 15. And they take turns with each teacher and para serving both groups of students so that all of the students are served by all of the adults. But instead of 30 children being in one classroom, there's 15 children in each classroom, both with and without IEPs. This happens approximately 80% of the time that they're together or more. So it's 80 to 100% of their day. They're fully in a collaborative model, so that it is an inclusive setting. These classes meet 5 days a week, and right now they are half day programs. So that's 2.5 hours a day. Okay, I think that's it, Lisa. Our PEP pilot is also a regular early childhood setting. And this is typically for our younger students who are 3 years old or who are young fours. So they're not going to kindergarten the following year. And really, this is the way for us to have an opportunity for our younger students to receive their services with typically developing peers, because the PEP collaboration classes and the PEP inclusion classes are for our children getting ready for kindergarten, because they're a model where we are collaborating or our children are fully included in the general education pre-K or Head Start classes, which are for students getting ready to go to kindergarten. So the PEP pilot addresses the need for a regular early childhood setting for our younger students. And the way this works is that there is a special education teacher and a paraeducator that are teaching the class. And then there are children with IEPs. It can be anywhere 9 up to 9 or 10 students typically. I'm always going to say usually, but there are community peers who come in. They pay a very, very small fee. They are usually from the neighborhood where the school is located. And they come into the class. These classes meet 2.5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And it becomes a regular early childhood setting because there are typically developing children learning alongside the children with IEPs. So the class size here, it can be a little bit larger because you have to think about if there are this group of students with IEPs, and then there are peers coming in from the community, the class size can go up to 12, 13, 14, possibly even 15 students. Okay, I think that's it, Lisa. And now what I'm going to do is start talking about our self-contained special education classes. As I said, we always look at the regular early childhood setting first, but some of our children require a smaller self-contained special education setting, and that is the appropriate place for them to learn and grow. So we have opportunities for that. So the first class I'm going to talk about is called PEP Classic. These are our self-contained classes that are half day. They're 5 days a week, 2.5 hours a day. There is a special education teacher and one special education paraeducator in the class. They are typically a smaller class size than the classes I've previously spoken about. As I was talking about, inclusive pre-K is 20 children. Our collaboration classes with the mix of students are more like 15, as our pilot can get to that size. Our classic classes tend to be smaller, 9, 10, 11, usually not larger than 12, but sometimes they can go up. Sometimes they can be larger. There are some instances where we try to bring a couple of typical peers from the community in. Some of our teachers have really tried to do this because they want the students to have some exposure to typical peers. But it wouldn't be considered a regular early childhood setting because there might just be 1, 2, 3 peers, as opposed to where there was a greater mix of children, both with and without IEPs. Okay. The next type of class we have is our PEP intensive needs class that we finally call PEP Inc. This is a special education setting taught by a special education teacher. And there are 2 special education paraeducators in the class. So that creates the smaller teacher to student ratio than our other classes. The children served in this class tend to need more adult support to be able to participate and learn and develop their skills. The classes tend to be more teacher directed as opposed to more child directed. But again, following the same curriculum as all of the other pre-K classes, just customizing it for the students in the class. These classes are also half day, 5 days a week, 2.5 hours a day. So as I said, the students typically tend to need more teacher direction and not be quite as independent as the children in the other classes, but we're always working towards that, towards greater independence for all of our kids. Okay, I think, all right. And then the last class that I'm going to talk about is the PEP full day class. This is also a special education setting. It is full day because the children in this class tend to need more repetition and more practice to develop their skills. It is a very comprehensive approach to services. The students typically have more significant learning delays and or multiple disabilities. It is taught by a special education teacher. There's 2 special education paraeducators in this class as well. So again, the ratio is smaller. They are full day, as I said, so they follow the typical school day, which is 6 hours and 5 minutes, I think. Right, Lisa's shaking her head. Thank you, Lisa. So, we do serve children in these classes, although we do in all of our classes who have medical needs or have some physical needs, but we also serve children with medical and physical needs in other classes as well. But the children that need this full day program, their needs tend to be more significant. Every child in the class does not have medical needs or does not have physical needs, but their delays tend to be greater, and the customization of the curriculum tends to be greater and more significant as well. So I tend to talk very fast, and I apologize for that. I was trying to slow myself down, but I'm from the Northeast, and it's really hard for me to do. But I guess that leaves me more time for questions then, and I'm assuming there probably will be some questions. So with that, Melanie, I'll let you direct the questions.
Sure. Thank you, Mary Rose. So yes, we have extra time for Q&A. There are a few questions in chat, and we did have some pre-submitted questions. Let's see. So one of the questions is, what training do teachers have to be special education teachers and paraeducators?
Okay. Well, the teachers are, most of the majority of the teachers are certified special education teachers, meaning they've passed the certification that they need for special education. They've gone through school, they've taken the state tests. There are specific requirements for paraeducators in general to be paraeducators. And then our paraeducators receive training from us and from our professional learning sessions. We do them continually throughout the year. They are trained by their teachers. So there are certain requirements that the county sets up for all of the paraeducators. And, you know, our paraeducators are in that, they fall into that bucket as well. And then they receive a lot of professional learning throughout the year.
Thank you. We did get a question previously about how much can students move around between the PEP programs. So if they are placed in one PEP program, let's say PEP Inc., can they move if things change to another type of PEP?
So that's a good question. And the answer is absolutely, because we never want to hold a child back if they're, we want to keep challenging our kids to grow and learn and move forward. So if they are placed in a class where it's a little bit more of a restrictive type of setting and they're ready for something a little more challenging and where they have to be more independent or work more with their typical peers, then we certainly want to give them an opportunity. We do make sure that we have good data before we're moving students, because we don't want to, we shouldn't just be going on a gut feeling. We need to have data to say like they're making progress, or we also sometimes have to move students to a class that might be a little bit of a smaller setting, or you know, give them a little bit more teacher direction because they may be struggling in the location that they're in, but it's always has to be based on data. Again, and we always want to give kids a chance wherever they are before we just say, okay, now it's time to move.
And just following up on that question with some practical advice for the parents, if they do feel like their child needs to be placed, can you tell them how they would go about doing that?
Absolutely. You know, you are your child's advocate, and if you should always know if your child is making progress or is not making progress, and the school team working with your child should always be communicating that information. So if you ever feel that you have concerns one way or the other, that your child needs to be challenged more and is ready for something different or needs something greater to support their needs, should always be talking to the school team about that and asking for an IEP meeting if you want to consider changes to services, or their goals need to be changed, things like that.
Okay. We have a question in the chat asking about IEPs. Are they the only consideration for placement, or are there more tests that need to be done?
So when children are first identified for services, they have to come through an assessment process to be identified and found initially eligible for services. That there's a screening process, and then also an assessment process. If a child is in infants and toddlers as a young child, then the infant and toddler team works with the family to look at the transition to possible preschool services. Once a child is identified, whether it's a child who's gone through a screening process and an assessment process with Child Find and been identified, or been identified as they're coming out of infants and toddlers, an IEP would be developed. And then once the child is in a program and has an IEP, the IEP may be updated based on classroom data, our assessments, our county assessments, on a district assessment, and just general observations and therapy logs, things like that. If ever a parent feels that additional testing is needed, they can certainly meet with the team and talk about that. And there are times when the team will meet with families and say, we'd like to consider further assessment. Sometimes that's because the child's up for reevaluation, but other times it's just because more data is needed and other testing might be needed to look at different services or to gather more data about the child's needs.
Yeah, I think you covered there is a question in the chat about assessments and how often they're given, and it sounds like children are evaluated when the IEP team determines that there is a need. But is there a typical number of years or time frame that children are reassessed?
Once a child is initially identified, then the law says that every 3 years, a team needs to consider if more testing is needed to determine future services, or if the child continues to qualify for services. Sometimes the team will meet and determine that all the data they have and the informal data is enough to say that the child continues to qualify for services and there does not need to be future assessment. There are times when they will determine they need more assessment, and sometimes it's less than 3 years if there's a reason to need more data. So sometimes we have children that come to us and it's less than 3 years and they're going off to kindergarten, and the data that the team has to make good decisions for kindergarten, they don't feel like it's enough data to make those good decisions. And they will be asking the parents for permission to do some further testing. That's sort of how it works in preschool, but then as children get older, if they've been identified as a student with a developmental delay, they can only carry that code that's opened the door for services until they are 7 years and 11 months. So before they turn 8 years old.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of information on assessments. So
Yeah.
that covers.
Lisa, did you want to add something, by the way?
No, I think you covered it.
The next question is about the distinction between the self-contained PEPs and the more inclusive PEPs. This person is asking, every student and program is different. However, what types of interventions and supports would you typically see in the self-contained class versus the more inclusive environments?
Well, it's very unique to each student. But the children who are in the inclusive settings, you know, as I said, depending on the type of class, there may be less staff in the room, because it's the children that are in that class don't need the level of support that some of the other children do. The curriculum is the same. It will be customized for the different needs of the students and where they are, but they're all looking at the same standards, the Maryland Early Childhood Standards. The instruction may be more or less teacher directed. There will be large groups and small groups in all of the classrooms. The small groups might be a little bit larger in if a child's fully included in a pre-K class because there's more students. So the small groups might not be as small, but there will be both large and small group instruction. They have a very similar schedule in all the classes where they do morning meeting, and they do a literacy time and a math time. The social emotional strategies that we ask our teachers to use should be embedded into all of the classes. All of our teachers have now been trained on the framework of the National Pyramid Model for Social Emotional Learning, which is a model that looks at like strategies that are good for all kids, and then strategies that are more targeted, and then strategies that are more individualized. So they've all been trained in the same type of framework. So it really depends on the needs of the student and how much support they need and what their goals are.
So it sounds like they're very similar besides class size in what you're saying, but in terms of, are there any interventions that just aren't possible, for example, in self-contained because it's not an inclusive classroom and they can't work on social skills with their neurotypical peers? Or on the other side, are there interventions that aren't possible in the inclusive classrooms because of staff or support size?
Mary Rose, can I
Sure.
just jump in for a second? I think when we're thinking about social skills, we do need to look at the range of what the child of the skill that the child is learning. So for some children, their social skills might be that they need to learn how to play with toys appropriately, while others might be learning how to play with toys appropriately with other children. Some children might be learning how to give or receive toys, and just that beginning of sharing or turn taking, while other children, we want them to be using more language and commenting and asking questions. And so when we look at social skills in general, the IEP is a very long document, and services and placement is at the end, because we need to look at a child's strengths and needs and what are those goals and objectives. What do we want them to achieve within a year's time frame? So we do need to make sure that the goals are achievable within the year. Not that we want them to do everything, because we do, but we need to make sure, based on the data and their rate of progress and the skills that they're demonstrating at that time, what do we feel like is achievable within that year's time frame? And sometimes we're right on track, and sometimes we're not, and we need to meet as a team to look at the IEP again. So if a child masters a goal or achieves a goal, we say that's fantastic. We write a new goal. We never get to really put our feet up and say we're done. We kind of move on. We have another meeting, and vice versa. If a child is not on track to achieve that goal within the end of the IEP cycle, the school team, we have our progress reports that go home. In PEP, it's twice a year, and so they would have send home those progress reports on the IEP goals and objectives. And if a student is not making progress in order to achieve the goal, then they would also have another IEP meeting. So while we are required by law to have one meeting per school year, doesn't mean we won't have more than one. It has to be at least one. So sometimes we have multiple meetings per child for each child, depending on what the data says. So it really, those social skills really depends on what the child is working on. And I think in our less restrictive environments where there's more inclusive opportunities, the students are a little bit more independent and able to work more collaboratively with their peers, with some facilitation as opposed to more facilitation or more adult support, which would then lead them more into a self-contained special education. Well, that's one of the factors that would lead them to a more self-contained special ed program. Marius, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, their skills are typically more developed when they're in a regular early childhood setting. So they don't need as much of that adult facilitation just to play with the toy possibly, or share a toy. They need some adult facilitation, but they're not at more of a basic level of developing that social skill, as Lisa said.
And in that same subject, there are some questions about how PEP can sort of customize or be flexible for the parent and their child. For example, if their child is in therapy for half the day, what are your AM and PM sessions, and can they, if they conflict, can they make a change?
So we always try to accommodate families for what will work for their schedules. We absolutely try to give people that want an AM class, and people who want a PM class, a PM class. We cannot always do that, especially as our enrollment goes up, because we don't want to over-enroll classes if we don't have to. And, you know, so sometimes we just can't, as hard as we try, honor a parent's wishes to have a morning class versus an afternoon class. But we always do try to work with families to accommodate that if we can.
Okay. And then in the programs that do include neurotypical children, how are those children placed into the PEP program?
So the PEP inclusion classes and the collaboration classes, we work with the Early Childhood General Education Office in Montgomery County in our school system, and it's a collaborative partnership. So our children are enrolled either into their classroom, or we are collaborating with them in the collaboration model. So those children are MCPS general education pre-K students. The pilot classes that we have for typically the younger children, there is a process where community peers, so peers who do not have IEPs, put in an application, and they can possibly then participate in the class with the children with the IEPs. It goes through the principal of the school and through our parent educators at the school to enroll those typical peers.
Okay, some more similar questions like that about, I think you covered this, but they're asking about whether or not the parents have input as to whether or not PEP services are provided at the child care site. I assume that's like an itinerant PEP service, or at a designated school. And I'm just going to combine that with another question. Can MCPS work with the child's existing OT or occupational therapist or speech therapist?
Okay, so parents are a required and critically important member of the IEP team. So when it comes to the part of the IEP meeting where you've talked about the goals and you've talked about what the hours of service that a child needs, and then you're really ready to look at what that setting would be, parents' input is always important in that discussion. So if a child is at a regular child care or preschool, that's certainly where the discussion should start, around whether it would make sense based on everything that came prior in the meeting, the goals and the hours of service needed, could lead to that child being served in that community preschool or child care. And that would be the first place that everybody would start the discussion. Regarding the private OT and PT or speech, we would typically ask families when they have private therapies if we can have permission to share information, because we would always want our therapists to be talking to the private therapist so everybody's on the same page as what are we working on, what are we seeing, how can we help the child grow. So that's how we would really work with them And then there was one other part that I don't remember that you asked, Melanie.
Actually, the occupational therapist and the speech therapist that the family has for their child, can they participate in the IEP process as well?
So parents can bring with them to IEP meetings. They're allowed to bring friends, a therapist with them to the meeting. That is, up to the parents. So if they feel that they would like their OT or speech therapist to come to an IEP meeting, they certainly can bring them. And as I said, we are always looking to share information about what is happening privately, and so that can inform school, and school can inform the private work.
Sure. I would say anyone who knows the child's strengths and needs would be helpful for that process.
Absolutely.
And then we do have a question. I know we're almost out. We are out of time with this section of the Q&A, but you did use the word data quite a bit. And one of the, someone is asking, what exactly are the types of data that you're referring to, especially for parents who are new to this whole process?
Sure. So when I'm saying that, it can mean a lot of things. I think what I was specifically speaking about is, let's say that the child is in a PEP intensive needs class in PEP Inc. And the team has been taking data on classroom progress. So how are they doing on their literacy skills and their math skills? And they're using the formative assessment that we use in Montgomery County called the Early Learning Assessment to gather observational data. And they have all this information, and the parent is seeing all this wonderful progress at home, and the team is looking at the IEP goals and going, wow, she's really doing, like, she's achieving all these goals. And then that can be data then to be looking at what does the child need next? Do we need to change the goals? Do we need to look at different services, a different type of class, a different type of services? So that's data just as much as a formal assessment can be data. It's really, the therapists keep logs, our teachers keep anecdotal notes about how a child is doing. So that is all data. There's many, many types of data.
Okay. I just got a message that we do have more time.
We have to move on.
We do have more time for Q&A. I think we have till 8. Yeah. So there are some more questions if you are open to that. Let me see. For child find, this person's asking, do we need a referral from someone to do the evaluation? Can you talk about child find a little bit?
Sure. So child find is really where, if a child is already 3 years old, where the whole process would start if a parent has any concerns about their child's skills, their child's development, thinks they may need any services. Sometimes parents come with referrals from doctors or from preschool teachers, but that's not necessary. It can just be the parent calling and saying, I have some concerns about my child's development. And when they call the child find office, which is what they would do, someone would be gathering some information, and then they set up a time for the parent to bring the child to a clinic, or like a screening clinic, where there are different types of sort of centers where the child would get screened in different types of skills. And then there is an IEP meeting held where, based on that data from the screening from the clinic, everyone decides if the child would need some further assessment to be considered for possible special education and related services. If the child does need some further assessment, then they would be referred to either one of our developmental evaluation services teams. It might just be to the speech office if it's just for some speech assessment, or if the child needs a bilingual assessment, then it would be to our bilingual team, and they would be referred on.
Right. Here, this one should be an easy one. Can you, I think we asked it before, but I don't know if we caught it. The specific start and end times for the half days in PEP. Can
Oh,
you?
sure. So it's based on the school, because in Montgomery County elementary schools, we have what are called tier 1 and tier 2 schools. So it depends on what school your child would be assigned to. And if it's a morning and or afternoon class, what time they would start. And let's see, Lisa's going to know this better than I do, but I believe the tier 1 schools start at 8:50. Is that correct, Lisa?
I think it's either like 9 to 3:30 or 9:30 to 4 minus 5 or 10 minutes here,
Something
either
like
way.
that.
But
So our half day programs, they start at the same bell time in the morning, and then they go 2.5 hours. And then it's about an hour and a half later that the second class comes in, because the second class leaves at the same time as the rest of the school. So the morning bell time and the afternoon bell time are the same time as the bell times of the school. The time in the middle for the half day classes, you have to add 2.5 hours or subtract 2.5 hours.
Thank you, Mary Rose. If someone is asking about the inclusive classroom, and given that, every IEP is individualized, and again, these are general descriptions of the programs that you mentioned, is it still possible for a child to get one-on-one support in an inclusive classroom? And if so, what kind of data would be necessary for that kind of support?
So we typically look at why a child needs adult support and when they do need adult support. We don't look at things as this child needs a one-on-one, because we always want to be careful about sometimes that makes a placement more restrictive, because a person on top of a child the entire time, if it's not appropriate for what they need, may be holding that child back from what they need to benefit. We look at adult support in terms of what does the child need adult support for? So do they need adult support for transitions? Do they need adult support for participating in a group activity? Do they need adult support for safety reasons because they might run away? So we look at it in terms of that, and then determine what type of support is needed to help that child be successful if it's determined that the appropriate place for them to meet their goals is in the regular early childhood setting. And if, how much staff is in that class or at that school, and can they provide the adult support that the child needs to be successful in that environment? So we do have children with all types of needs being served in all type of settings. So it just really depends on the needs of the child and what they need adult support for.
And I'll just add that critical staffing is not an IEP team decision, but rather a school-based decision. So we write what the child needs on the IEP, and then it is the responsibility of the school team to implement. So if you write that a student needs adult support for transitions outside of the classroom because there are concerns about elopement, let's say, if the school team can provide that support, holding their hand, walking next to them, ensuring their safety within the context of the classroom staff, then critical staffing wouldn't be necessary for the school staff to acquire. However, if they do feel like they need it because of that behavior or because of that need based on the supports that were determined necessary at the IEP, then the principal would work with their area supervisor to get more staffing for that child. So we write what the child needs on the IEP, and then it's up to the school team to deliver those services.
Okay. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term you use, critical staffing, I see in the chat we have it's staffing support provided in addition to the standard staffing levels in a particular setting. Is that correct?
Critical staff, yes. Or people saying a one-to-one, we call critical staffing, but yes.
Okay. All right. So for the parents with even younger children who have a child who's in infants and toddlers currently, if they decide to end services for whatever reason, does that negatively impact future eligibility for an IEP if one is needed down the line?
Absolutely not. I want to make sure you said if they decide to decline services, is that what you said?
Right.
Absolutely not. I mean, a family can always come back to the school system and, ask for depending on when it is. I mean, sometimes we have parents decline the preschool services and 2 months later decide they want to come back and be, and receive services. And at that point, because it's only been a couple of months and their IEP is still active, we'll just start getting them into school and getting them into the right place. If it's been a while, then the process would most likely have to start over, but there would never be a time when a child or a family would be turned away.
And that's the same if the child left infants and toddler services. So if they were 2 and were found eligible for infants and toddler services, but decided not to participate, but then at 3, they decided they wanted school-based services, we might have to start through Child Find because we don't have any updated data for the last year. But if it's within a certain time frame, and I don't have that time frame, but we would look at present levels. What are the skills that the child has? What are their strengths, needs, and do we have enough information to draft or create goals and objectives, which will then help us determine services and placement.
Okay, so we're pretty much at 8 o'clock. So I think we can move on. We will have time for more Q&A after Lisa. So,
Yes.
So I'm happy to have Lisa Grant with us, and she is an instructional specialist for autism services, and she's going to talk about the Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program, also known as CAPP.
Great. So one of the things I did want to start off with is that children with autism are in every preschool program that we have in Montgomery County. So diagnosis does not drive placement. So if you have been identified as an autistic child, that does not mean that you should be in the autism program or that you shouldn't be in the autism program. It just means that you are now eligible for special education services. So with that being said, not all students in our CAPP program have an educational disability code of autism. The majority of them do, but it's not a requirement. The Comprehensive Autism Preschool Program, or CAPP, provides intensive and individualized services for students ages 3 to 5 years old. The students require a full day of evidence-based instructional practices and behavioral supports. We focus on communication and language. We focus on improving adaptive skills and ultimately provide access to a variety of school-age services to maximize independence in all domains. Class size typically 6 to 7 students with 1 classroom teacher, a special education teacher, 2 full-time paraeducators, and 3 part-time paraeducators. So as you've heard throughout the night, The continuum of services go from the least restrictive, where there might be a general education teacher and plug-in or a special education teacher coming into the class periodically to provide those services, to a more restrictive classroom where there are a lot of adults and very few children. So in CAPP, for parts of the day, we will have 6 adults for 6 or 7 students. Occasionally we go to 8. We are a public school building, so our public school program, so we don't say no. We don't ever close our doors. And so we do, so that is our CAPP description. Marios, if you can go to the next slide, please. Students may have significant needs in the area of adaptive skills, so they might not be toilet trained. They might still need to work on some of their feeding skills or fine motor skills that align to dressing or using utensils. They do show significant needs in the area of communication. And I always say, if you aren't able to communicate, often we'll see some problem behaviors. So it's not uncommon that we have students who engage in some interfering behaviors that we'll work on decreasing as we increase those communication and language skills. And then, of course, they do have needs in the area of social skills. And they vary. I will say that the majority of our students that come to CAPP really come to us with limited communication. So either they're completely nonverbal or they have a few words, but it's not in conversation. They might be able to say every letter of the alphabet, or they might be able to say, you know, all the numbers. They might be able to label things in their environment, but it's not functional in the sense that they can ask for what they want or communicate their needs. And in the area of social skills, most of our students prefer to be by themselves. And so our goal is to establish some motivation for them to interact and engage with other people. So a lot of what we do in the area of social skills is really to teach the child to engage with the adults first, and then we'll generalize that to the children. And we are working on teaching them how to play with things appropriately, how to play with the toys with me, maintaining a little bit more time on task. So many of our students have fleeting interests, so they might push a car for a second and then they'll go something else, and so they kind of wander. And so we want to extend that time on play. So we're not going to push the car once, but we're going to go down a ramp and we're going to go under a tunnel and make some car noises and try and make it fun. Students in the autism program are accessing the just like all the other students, but we are modifying it pretty significantly as their rate of learning is much slower than a child who does not have an IEP. Can move to the next slide.
Lisa, are we on the right slide? Or
No, there should be one more where it
um,
says instruction is provided. Sorry, let me look. There you go. Yes. Yes.
okay.
Instruction is provided individually and or in dyads, which is one adult with 2 students for almost 4 hours a day. So in our CAPP classrooms, the students do need adult support throughout the day from the time they get off the bus. We call it a handoff. So we are meeting our students at the bus. We are helping them walk down to the classroom as independently as possible. And then we work through trying to teach them how to unpack and manage their belongings. You know, for our baby 3-year-olds, we might be doing a lot of hand over hand or a lot of modeling and a lot of practicing, but our goal is for them to be able to, at some point during that school year, unpack their own belongings, know where their coat goes. And so we're working on that every day. We do about 4 hours, like I just said, of what we call an intensive teaching, where we're focusing on 3 parts. The first part is communication. So we have designated time each hour where we are working on communication. I will have a smorgasbord of things that I know the child likes because I've talked to their parents and they have shared all of their secrets. They like Doritos and they like Skittles and they like musical toys and they like Peppa Pig, and I've got all of that and I'm willing to give them all of that. And all they have to do is communicate. And I'm going to teach them what that means. So for some students, it might be handing a picture of Peppa Pig to me. And then I give them Peppa Pig. And so just that picture exchange. For some students, it's saying the word Peppa Pig or something close to. And for other children, it might be a sign if we decide that sign is appropriate. So we're really looking at using a multimodal communication style. And we work closely with the speech pathologist on what is best for that particular child. And it does change. And as the child develops skills, it may change. And hopefully in the right direction. Our instruction is individualized based on IEP goals. And I'm sorry, I didn't tell you the other two parts. So that's the first part is communication. The second part is our play skills. And so we call our natural environment teaching, or NET. And that's where we are, if you can envision a play area with toys, and it's still pretty structured because what we know is that the child is still not playing with toys appropriately because that's what our data tells us. And so we might pick a garage and our goal is for them to push the car, for that week. And if we get that, if our data says they're now pushing the car, one car, we might expect them to have it go down the ramp and around, or adding a sound to it, or, so we are trying to expand their play skills, and spend longer times on the different play activities. And then we have our table time instruction. Our table time instruction is typically one-on-one, sometimes in a dyad, like I said, two students with one child. But even in the dyad, I might have one child is engaging in reinforcement or doing an activity independently, like a puzzle or a file folder game, and I'm working with the other child. And so I am still kind of providing that individual attention to that one child, and then we would switch. So I've done, a minute of instruction here. I'm going to give them reinforcement or a break, and I'm going to turn to the other student and work directly with that child. All of our students do require direct, repeated instruction presented in a highly systematic manner in order to acquire skills. And all of our instruction is based on the principles of applied behavior analysis, or ABA. Instruction is individualized based on IEP goals and objectives. We do look at or reference the curriculum as well as some other resources, such as the VB-MAP or ABLES as a tool to kind of guide us in that language development, as that's such an area of need for our students. We do provide group instruction daily. We have a morning meeting that's usually about 15 minutes. I will say group time is probably the most challenging for our students, having to sit for 15 minutes and amongst peers and taking turns and waiting, maybe not listening to the song they wanted to listen to for, the Days of the Week song or the Hello song. But we do work on group instruction as we feel like it's important as a child gets older. Life is not all one-on-one. So we do provide group daily. We do try also to do a literacy group every day. That's also about 15 minutes. And then some years or some parts of the school year, maybe towards the second half of the school year, we might be able to do a math group. It really is just dependent on the students. So we really kind of look at the class as a whole and the students to determine whether or not it's appropriate for more group instruction. We are a full day program, as I said, and so lunch and recess occurs in our schools. The students do eat lunch in the cafeteria, and they go outside for recess with non-disabled peers. And so they are in a cafeteria with about, I don't know, 50 to 75 students. Staff are with our students during lunch. So there are about, so we'll have the 6 or 7 students at our own table with 2 staff supporting them at lunch. And then we go outside for recess, and there's typically 3 adults just for safety reasons. They're outside supporting our students during recess, and there is some opportunities for some engagement with children without IEPs. All of our specials are self-contained, art, music, PE, and media, and are supported by our classroom staff. So at a minimum, there are 2 adults that go to those specials. Sometimes, depending on when those specials are scheduled, we might send, some of our part-time staff to go there as well to support the students. And I think the only other thing I would say is that students in CAPP have demonstrated, either through infants and toddlers or through the parent input or through testing, that they really benefit from more of that discrete trial instruction than they do from traditional special education. So they really need that type of instruction in order to learn. And I think while I am born and raised in Montgomery County, I think I talk fast. So it's quick and easy here.
That's fine. Leaves more time for Q&A. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure.
So I think you were talking about this already, about whether a child needs CAPP versus PEP, and it really, can you explain a little bit about how a parent and where a parent should go to first if they are thinking about one or the other, if they've started in one and they're thinking about the other as being more of a fit for their student, for their child?
So if a child is in PEP and the parent feels that they need a more restrictive setting such as CAPP, we always encourage the family to go to the classroom teacher with their concerns. I mean, that's their first step. I'm not seeing the progress at home, or whatever the reason being, if they think the child needs more. And the school is going to look at their classroom data. I hate to say this without it's going to sound bad, but it's not a choice. It's really based on the instructional need, right? And so I didn't make the law. I just have to kind of follow the law. So oftentimes we think more is better. Let's give him so much, and then we can fade the supports out. And that's not the way the school system works, because that's not the way the law says. The law says least restrictive environment. With that being said, we do recognize that some children are not making progress based on what I call more traditional special education services, and really do require that discrete trial or errorless teaching, that ABA methodology to learn. So the first step is to definitely go to your classroom teacher, share your concerns. The school team is going to respond a variety of ways. They're going to say, we agree with you. We're already on top of it. We've asked for an autism consult, or we are, we're scheduling an IEP meeting, or we feel like we need to update, whatever the case may be. The school team might say, wow, our data is showing this. And then they might say, you know what, let's maybe you can come in and observe, or I can take, now with technology, and we know what technology to do. You can do a virtual observation of your child, so you can see that, look, he is demonstrating his number sense, or he is identifying his letters, and he is participating in group, and he's doing quite well in the PEP classroom, whichever PEP classroom that is. And so there might be a little bit disagreement, but our goal is to certainly kind of meet so that everybody is on the same page. And so we would want to work with the family. And it might be that the team calls for an IEP meeting or asks for someone from CAPP or Autism to come out and observe the student and provide some feedback, so that it's just another data point on helping the school team make that, or that IEP team make the decision. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. And I think you answered one of the questions that I received was, have there been situations where a child was in PEP for a number of years and then they were moved to CAPP because of their needs? And
yes, and vice versa.
Vice
yes.
versa. That's what I was going to say. It's sort
absolutely,
of
and vice versa.
We work
yes.
really closely together. So we're constantly calling Lisa and Chris and the autism unit, and they constantly are reaching out to us and saying, hey, we think these kids are ready for more natural teaching. Please, somebody come out and look at them, because we want to move them on and we want to challenge them more. So we're, and sometimes we just, as Lisa said, we ask for them to come out and give us some additional strategies, because we think that the child is making some progress, but we think we could maybe do some additional things that might help more. And they come out and give the team some additional strategies. So we're constantly going back and forth.
Actually, that reminds me, for those who are not familiar what an autism consult is, can one of you explain that?
Sure. So CAPP, I just did some math real quick. How many, Mary Rose, you said how many students are in PEP in all of the different PEP programs?
Right now, it's about 1,700 right now.
So there are about 114 students in CAPP. So clearly it's a much smaller program than the PEP programs. Even with the range of services that PEP has, it is still pretty small compared to, and that's done on, that's because we really want our students to be successful with more natural or more traditional special education services. But we do autism all day long. That is our, that's kind of what we know. And we do provide services from preschool to 21. So often a school team might say, we think they're in the right place, but we just need some strategies. We just want another set of eyes, fresh eyes, to kind of look to see what could we put into place to help this child be more successful in their current placement. And so we would come in and provide an autism consult. The consult is really to the school team to say, oh, have you considered reinforcement, or have you considered, visual supports to include first then? Have you tried a timer or transition warnings, whatever the area of support that they need. Occasionally they'll ask for an autism consult / placement observation, but because they have concerns that whether that the current placement might not be the most appropriate placement, and that the child may need something more restrictive. And so, and this can go both ways, because we ask for PEP placement observations always as well. And so we'll come in and kind of give our thoughts, but ultimately it is the IEP team's decision to make that recommendation.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sure.
There is a question about CAPP and transition to kindergarten. What kind of options are there for CAPP students who are going to move to kindergarten? And what about students who are non-speaking? Are there options for them?
Absolutely. So I will say the majority of the students in CAPP do go on to continue to need our elementary services for kindergarten. and you can learn all about that on Thursday. But I'll give you a little highlight. It's very similar to CAPP. The biggest difference is that we add a little bit more group instruction because our students need to learn to engage in group activities and be with peers. And we do we do more dyad instruction. So, we want our students to learn to wait. So instead of 6 staff, we have 3 adults. So 2 paraeducators and a teacher. So our elementary classroom is really like a continuum of our CAPP services, and very similar in our philosophy and our teaching methodology and our strategies. And I lost my train of thought. Tell me your question again.
The options for non-speaking students moving from CAPP to kindergarten.
So we relook at the range of services that we're going to talk about on Thursday night, but we do start with services in the homeschool, which is very similar to what we would look at as PEP itinerant. It would be homeschool model services, and there's a continuum. So Mary Rose went through a lot. We have almost as many elementary or kindergarten programs or services as well, and so we really do look at those continuum of services, starting at the least restrictive and going into a more restrictive setting. There are multiple programs for students who are nonverbal, and just because they can't produce speech doesn't mean they don't have communication. And so the question is, have they acquired some kind of communication system that will, and the answer still might be they're working on it, and that would help kind of determine what services there are. But there are services for students who are not yet toilet trained in kindergarten and who are still developing that communication system. Hopefully that answers your question.
Lisa, one parent is asking about retention. Does that ever happen with CAPP students? Do you ever retain a student because they're not ready for kindergarten? I think that's the question.
So I will say this, our job is to meet the student where they are, whether they're in pre-K or kindergarten or 5th grade. We are to meet the student where they are in their strengths and their needs and work on their skills. The autism program is really able to individualize. And so I do pre-K to 5th grade. So right now, if you went into one of my elementary classrooms, you might see a student who is still working on developing or taking ownership of his communication, right? So he's learning how to ask for things. We're still working on toilet training. We're working on those learning behaviors, being able to sit for a longer period of time. In the area of math, we might be working on some matching and sorting. We might be working on counting with one-to-one correspondence. So as I count, they touch. We might be working on building their vocabulary. And that might be one child. But for another child, I'm working on addition, and I'm working on answering WH questions from a story. So we're really able to differentiate our instruction based on the child. We do have some students who are older who are still working on kindergarten standards. We're still back mapping, if you will, to what would be considered a kindergarten standard. And that's where that child is, and that's okay. So retention does happen. I usually no. The answer is no, but there are always exceptions to every rule. It is an IEP team and administrator decision about retention, because we do really think about what that means for that child. I will say, in the cases about retention, for me, I'm really looking at the behavior and how much it impacts the child. And so if they have significant aggression or significant self-injurious behaviors, if they have more, their duration or the length of their tantrum is pretty significant and it really impedes their availability for learning, those would all be little red flags for me to say, I'm not so sure this child is ready to go to kindergarten. But that's not always the case because we do have students that engage in those behaviors. It's just, that's a roundabout way without answering your question. But it does happen. It's not something that we do often. How's that?
Okay, I think that covers it. I do want to remind people that, Mary, Rose, and Lisa can't tell you the best fit for your child because they don't know your child. But that being said, if someone has a child with significant needs, nonverbal, and that needs a lot of support with toileting and just communication, and they also are in danger of their safety is in danger, for example. Is that something that is more of a fit for CAPP or PEP Inc.? How would you answer this parent's question?
I think that profile of child can be seen in our PEP Inc. class, our PEP full day class, and our CAPP class. Most often, I wouldn't say that the other PEP classes, but every once in a while we do.
Right.
And then we work with, the school team and the family, but it's really hard to determine. I think, at that initial IEP meeting, from infants and toddlers to school-based services, or from child find to school-based services, we're looking at the information that we have, and we're making a we're making a decision on the information that we have. We might make we hopefully made the right decision, and we will see progress. And then there are times where we need to kind of go back to the school, back to the team with the parents to say, this might not be the best place for your child, and let's consider the other options. So it's hard to say without looking at other data, but I think there's not a profile of a student that hasn't been in all of our programs. So it's really hard to determine. There's no checklist, I can say the majority of our kids are nonverbal, but I have students who can talk, and they talk a lot. It's just not functional communication. So it's hard.
Yeah. It really depends on the whole profile of the child, because we see kids with those needs all the time, just like Lisa does.
So to help with the distinction between the two programs, between PEP and CAPP, some parents are asking about ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis, and that intervention. There's a parent who is asking, what if we don't want to do ABA, and are there other options? And another parent is asking, do some of the PEP programs use some of the ABA reinforcement strategies? So is there overlap at all?
So
You want me to go ahead, Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so ABA there are strategies within the confines of ABA that should be in every program, if you ask me. Reinforcement is not something, we all have reinforcement. I get a paycheck every 2 weeks. I like being told that I did a good job. I see progress, I celebrate. So reinforcement is the principles of reinforcement fall under that ABA methodology, if you will. But reinforcement happens in a general education classroom with students who do not have IEPs. And so I think the bigger thing I think most people, when they think of ABA, they're thinking about that discrete trial instruction where I put 3 pictures down and I say, touch the cup, and they touch the cup, and I tickle them, or I give them, Peppa Pig. I don't even know if Peppa Pig is still popular, but Peppa Pig. And so if the team, and again, parent is part of that school team, if the parent does not believe that the discrete trial instruction is appropriate and that the child can learn from more traditional special education, direct, repetition, then they wouldn't come to CAPP because that's not the least restrictive environment. If there's data to show that that might be the only way that they've learned, or that they're not learning from more of that traditional special education, then PEP will try some modified ABA or discrete trial just to kind of take some data. I've worked with some school teams to say, if I were to read a story and I say in the story, my goal is for the students to learn 4 of the vocabulary words from the story. So I'm going to read, The Gingerbread Man. And in that, so at the end of the story, and I'm going to read it for a week, or I'm going to read it for 2 weeks. And by that end of my data collection will say they didn't know what a fox was. That was a terrible story, but that I picked. But they didn't know what a fox was, and they didn't know what the gingerbread cookie was, and they didn't know what the river was, lake, river, whatever, the body of water, okay? And those were the 3 words that I'm going to teach through repetition and saying, I'm going to read the story, I'm going to have them touch, I'm going to have them use, I'm going to show a picture, we're going to draw some, after the story, we're going to color the fox, we're going to do some special education instruction, if you will, to talk about those things. And at the end of those 2 weeks, 1 week, whatever our data is, they acquire those vocabulary words, then I know my instruction is working. If at the end of those 2 weeks, this is just a very small sample, they're still not showing that they know this, I might say to the school team in PEP, and they'll try this, I want you to put 3 pictures out and say, touch fox. And I want you to, and then when he does, I want you to clap your hands and, shout hooray, or give him Peppa Pig, or give him, a Skittle, and use that direct reinforcement as a reward for, doing, what I asked. And we're going to do multiple repetitions throughout the day out of context, not within the context of the story, but just practicing it throughout the day. This is a fox, this is water, and this is a cookie. And in 2 weeks, did they acquire those skills? And so that kind of data is being done because we always ask questions, and I will do the same thing, the reverse. So I will say, we're gonna read a story that we're not going to address during discrete trial instruction time, and we're going to see, can this child acquire new vocabulary without the intensive teaching of discrete trial?
Okay.
I tend to talk a lot when I answer
No,
questions.
and sometimes we have students in PEP that need to learn a certain skill, like maybe to count, where everything else they make progress in a natural learning through natural teaching and a natural learning, but they might have certain skills where they just learn them in a more discrete trial kind of format, and we can do that for that period of time for their math skills or something.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they need 4 hours of a dyad a day and they need to be in the CAPP class. They may just need that type of teaching as a strategy to acquire a certain type of skill.
Okay, so it looks like, different strategies and interventions are not exclusive to one program, is what you're saying. I think I hear what you're saying, that you can still use strategies that work in CAPP, in PEP, if that is has shown progress with a specific child. And would you say vice versa as well?
I would say it's to the level of what they need, and how much they need, and for how many hours they need it, and for how many, like for if they need to learn all their skills through that type of ABA type instruction, then PEP is not going to deliver 6 hours or 4 hours of
That's 6
ABA.
hours. Yeah.
Yeah, 4 hours of ABA instruction, and with then some natural teaching, and that it's more going to be for us, for specific times or specific skills, because most of the day it's really going to be more of a natural teaching environment.
Okay. Thank you. So let's say a parent is thinks their child needs a different placement because they're not thriving in the program that they're in. Is it possible to move within the PEP programs? Is there more fluidity within the PEP programs, for instance, especially if time is of the essence and they're in their last year before kindergarten?
Absolutely. I mean, I think I spoke to this a little bit earlier, that, our teams are continuously collecting data. And again, data doesn't necessarily mean assessments. It can just mean classroom observations and anecdotal notes and how they're doing on the curriculum, how they're doing on their IEP goals. And they're constantly looking at, is a child making progress? And if they're, are they in the right environment? Because if they're not making progress, then something needs to change. And parents obviously are and should be doing the same thing. Like, they're certainly monitoring whether their child is making progress. And when a parent has concerns, if they haven't heard from the school team about concerns, but a parent has concerns, then they should first absolutely right away be talking to the school team about their concerns and about the concern for the lack of progress and what are we going to do about it.
And is there, I think as a parent, the whole IEP process and placement can sometimes take time. I think this person is asking, is there a certain, I mean, I'm sure we all strive to make sure that the student is properly placed, but is there a certain amount of time that is needed to change placement? And is it, I think they're asking if is it a little bit easier than a regular change of placement within the PEP continuum? Does that make sense?
So we still, whether it would be from PEP to CAPP or CAPP to PEP or within PEP, we need to have some kind of data that we need to be looking at making a change. So I wouldn't want to give it a certain time period, because again, every child is different and every situation is different. We wouldn't want to move a child immediately, after a week that they're in school, or, typically, 2 weeks they're in school or something, because we want to give them a chance. We see a lot of children come in and they often may struggle the first week, the first 2 weeks, even the first month of school, because they're adjusting, and it's a change, and there's all new people, and there's demands being put on them that weren't put on them before, and they may not be able to communicate, and where's my mom, or where's my dad, or where's my sister or my aunt, or my nanny, or and they may not understand. So we have to give them a little bit of time to adjust and to see how they do, but it isn't really a set amount of time. It's not 2 weeks, it's not a month, it's not 3 months. It's really based on what their goals are, and if they're making progress, or if the parent's really concerned or the team is really concerned. The conversation should always be open. And a parent should always feel free to express to the school team if they have concerns about how their child's doing.
A parent is asking if their child moves from CAPP to PEP, especially if they're making progress. Is there anything that the child is going to lack in terms of education roadmap? I'm not sure what that they mean by that, but yeah. So yeah, the question is there a way the child is going to lack anything for a child being in CAPP versus PEP in terms of education roadmap?
So I will say, you know, students in the CAPP program are receiving instruction using a specific methodology because it was determined that they needed it. So that discrete trial, it's definitely not, it's not a natural way to learn, but for some students, it might be the only way they're demonstrating learning. As a child progresses and shows us that, you know, that they're able to learn, or we have a question, we have a hypothesis. Can the students learn using more natural teaching strategies? We try and answer that question. That might be going into a typical pre-K classroom with support from our CAPP class to see if they can follow instructions, if they can gain new information from that type of environment. It might be that we do more center-based type of instruction within CAPP, moving away from that discrete trial while we call Mary Rose and her team to say, hey, can someone come and take a look at, you know, at this student, because this is what she's doing. You know, we might have the parent go visit PEP, or we might, you know, we try not to have any secrets. Everything, you know, we're as transparent as, if we know it, we think it, we share it with the family. So we have exciting news. You know, the child is doing fantastic. We want to consider, you know, all options. We're going to ask someone come and take a look. And then we make a decision. So will they be missing anything? I don't think so, but we recognize that that's where they needed to start. And that instructional methodology helped them get to where they are. And you know, we don't have a crystal ball, but if we had started in something less restrictive based on our data and it wasn't a good match, would the child still be where they are? Because maybe they wouldn't have gotten that intensity or the behavioral support or the whatever, you know, that instructional methodology to get them to the point of where they could learn with peers and learn from more traditional special ed. So I think at 3 and 4 years old, you know, certainly as students get older and they're accessing the curriculum with significant modifications, there are long-term ramifications. But I think in pre-K, I don't think so.
So when you say curricular modifications, can you be specific for some of our parents?
Sure. So if you look at our Eureka Math booklet, let's say they will provide a lot of different activities that require a lot of language and also require a lot of joint attention, or a lot of being able to answer, what was your favorite part of that lesson? And that's going to be a huge challenge for students in CAPP. And if they can answer those questions and really engage, then I'm calling Mary Rose to say, you know, we need you to come out. But so I might look at that lesson to say, I am based on maybe the child smiled when we were doing the song that was related to the activity, or maybe they got excited when we started counting with the manipulatives. I might say, oh, I think your favorite part was this, because I know they don't have the answer. I might have pictures and say, I think your favorite part was, you know, the song. Tell me, you know, and then kind of give them a chance to respond. but I might, for some children, not even ask that question. And maybe I'm not presenting it in a group format, or I might be, maybe the student's not ready for the activity that the curriculum is indicating this is the week, it's week 4 of the first quarter, and we should be teaching whatever it is that we should be teaching. And I say, oh, but he has to learn all of these prerequisite skills first. And so while I might think about how to address that, I'm really modifying it pretty significantly to say I don't expect him to be able to create a set if we are still working on the one-to-one counting, counting with one-to-one correspondence. And so our goal might be the creating a set, but I'm really focusing and targeting that counting with one-to-one correspondence. Or I might be focusing on just the number, or I might be focusing on the matching. Let's put all the red ones here or the yellow ones here. And then I will count with their finger, and help them. But we want to take data on what the child is able to do within that's reasonable and feasible and achievable, and not just present to present, but we want them to acquire the skill. Does that make sense?
There is a question about, can you elaborate on or explain the term dyad again?
Sure. A dyad is just when one adult is working with 2 students at the same time.
Okay. Okay. And just earlier in the chat, I think someone was asking about play, and a lot of the instruction is play-based. You mentioned inappropriate play. Can you tell this parent or give them examples of what inappropriate play means in the educational sense?
So I don't know if I would call it inappropriate play. It's just not play. Maybe the student is not playing with the activity as it was designed. So if they pick up a car and instead of rolling the car or smashing, crashing 2 cars together or having it go down a ramp, maybe they flip the car over and they just spin the wheel, and they're really looking at just that wheel, and it's more of a self-stimulatory behavior rather than playing with the car as it was intended. Maybe if we're playing with blocks and instead of building a structure, or even if you're building a structure and then knocking it down, or maybe they're just lining up the blocks, and they get very unhappy if you try and help them, like, look, let's build a bridge, or let's build a castle or a house, or and so they're engaging in more of that self-stimulatory behavior or that stereotypy rather than engaging in the toy as it was designed. And so our goal would be to teach those skills, like, look, I'm going to show you how to play with blocks. I'm going to teach you. And then, eventually we'd like you to be able to play with blocks. Then I want you to play with blocks with me. And then I want you to be able to play with blocks with a peer. So we really break down all of those skills into into steps, into different skill sets.
Yeah, it's really very, the object becomes very much part of their stimming. It becomes repetitive. I am very familiar with that. My son used to wave the cars in front of his face, and he would go through a whole bucket of cars doing that. But it can also mean like throwing objects, right? And
sure.
Destroying toys as well.
Sure. And so if a student, that would be a behavior. And if we wanted to address the behavior, and let's say if the student likes to throw, I'm going to analyze kind of what is it about the throwing that they love. Do they like watching it kind of go through the air? Do they like the sound? Do they like the feeling? Do they like hearing it fall to the ground? And then we might introduce some things that you can throw, like balls into a basket, are a very appropriate throwing activity. Bean bags into a basket, or, we might get a little, Fisher-Price basketball set. And so we're going to teach the student through reinforcement and proactive strategies. This is what you throw. And then when we have the cars, we roll the cars. We don't throw the cars, kind of thing. So kind of looking at what the function of that is giving them, what are they getting out of that behavior?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we covered lots of questions tonight. If you still have questions for the presenters, I think we have some contact information on how you can try to get some information. It may have prompted you to think about other things that we didn't get to tonight, but let's see. So thank you so much, Mary Rose and Lisa.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if people do have questions, beyond, they can certainly call my office, or send an email, although a phone call is probably better because sometimes the email gets buried. So, but there's certainly, feel free to call the office and, I can try to answer questions individually.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so you shared a lot of important information that isn't always easy for parents to find. So right now, I'd like to invite everyone in our audience to complete a short 2-question feedback form. And to get that feedback form, use the link that it should be in the chat. We've recorded this presentation and we'll email you a link to the recording in the next few days, as well as a link to the slides. Tonight is not the end of our primer on placement series. We will be meeting again this Thursday for session 3. Please join us on Thursday night at 7 p.m. to learn about MCPS special education services for elementary school students on the autism spectrum. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And once again, thank you to our panelists.